Welcome back to the Mega Man-like mini-series. Today's video we're going to make a weapon switcher. This is going to allow us to have just a little icon on the HUD, lets us know what weapon we're in at the moment, and be able to switch to these couple weapons that we've developed. And you'll see how easy it will be to add more weapons with a system like this. So with that said, let's get started. All right, so we'll start in the player gun object, which is where all the weapon logic is, at least as far as what bullet to fire. And we have these different nodes as far as firing the basic shot and then firing the boomerang shot, but we have no way to get from this one to this one. Yes, we could simply do something like this and then make one back, but then we would have to make sure that all of these actions also are providing a similar link check back to whatever weapon. Especially as we get more, the links could be crazy. So let's make a new system here that is going to automatically do it from just one action. And so where we're going to begin is I'm going to take this and we'll just delete the animation set here. And we're just going to call this one processing or process weapon. And I'll actually capitalize this process weapon. I'll show you why here in just a minute. And so for right now, we just have these two weapons. I'm also going to color it yellow. And it's either going to be firing a basic shot or it's going to be firing the boomerang shot right now. We also want to make sure this is the default action because this is the one that's going to be basically governing what weapon is currently equipped. Now, in order to do this, the best way to differentiate what kind of a weapon you're on is through a variable. So we're going to go to the resource tab. We're going to use a common variable. Now, this could be in a object self switch. As of 1.0.5, these variables in object self switches can save. However, a setup like this definitely would be better in a common variable because anything can access it. So we're going to add a variable here and we're going to say weapon current weapon, and then you could say equipped or however you want, and the default value is going to be 0. So what I like to do when I'm creating these variables is I like to say what the default value is. So the default value is 0. This is helpful for when you have 100 or plus common variables and you're playtesting them all the time and you're changing the default value so that you can quickly playtest through areas, and then you want to now build your game. Well, now you got to go through all those variables and remember what the default value is supposed to be. So really nice to just write at the top what the default value is, and then you can just go like this and see all their default values. Obviously, can't see the, that wasn't a good example, but that's how one way it could help. Okay, so now that we have the default, now I want to start assigning what the values are. So if 0 equals the basic weapon and 1 is going to equal the boomerang. So really we can just say 0 equals basic, 1 equals boomerang. So there we go. We have our list of what the values are representing. We can go to the object here and now we can start to add that logic in. So if the common, this is how you select the common variables. If the current weapon equals 0, then we are definitely going to basic. If it is, and I'll just paste it and change it to 1. And if it's 1, we are going to boomerang. So we can really simply just test this. Right now it's set to 0. So if we test this, we should be green. There we go. And now if we test it to 1, we are now blue. We are the boomerang. So I'm going to set this to 0. All right, so that's good and all, but we need a way to change that variable so that we know. And we need a way for when that variable is changed, this object recognizes it without having to have all the links from every single action. So first, while we're in this object, let's set up the way to detect when that change happens. And we're going to do that simply by using a common action. I'm going to click OK, and then we're going to go to the common action tab that it adds. And we're going to add a common action. Now I'm going to show you this quick method. I call it a go-to method, but really that's just because it's what I name it. So we're going to go to process weapon. And now when we see it in here, sometimes you have to adjust these real quick. And then I also like to color these yellow as well. And that was the reason why I colored this process weapon yellow, is because whenever I'm running a this go-to type thing, I always color them yellow, and I try to place it on top. So I know exactly this common action leads to process weapon. All right, so now how do we use this common action? Well, the first thing is we'll just do some normal housekeeping stuff. We'll make sure that not affected by gravity is checked. But the key to this is we want to make sure that we dead end it. And how we dead end the common action, meaning that it will never leave, because how a common action works is, say that we're in the charged state right here and the common action triggers. It's going to pull you out of the charged state, take you to this common action, run whatever it needs, and then it's going to put you back into the charged state. So we want to prevent that. We actually want it to pull it out and then go back to process weapon. So we have to control it a little more. And so this is how you control it. You can click change if any conditions are met, and then just do not put any other conditions. Now that dead ends it, but you got to make sure if you're dead ending it, you have a place for it to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to send it via execute object action of the object self, and we're going to go to process weapon. This is one reason I capitalized it, so I could easily find it in here. When you get those long lists, it kind of helps if you have a naming system or something, or maybe it's a hyphen or something, that just helps you detect actions that you might be executing action to. All right, so the object self, process weapon, we're only going to have one in the scene, so that's all we need to do. And we'll hit OK. So now that will work. Now we need the way in. How do you get into this common action? How do you detect to come in? Now, you can't simply do it with this variable alone, because that's obviously the first thought is, well, if that current weapon changes. Well, you can't do a if change unless you know what the value was before. So in order to do that, you actually have to create another variable, and this is going to be called the current weapon. But this is going to be or even to make it more clear, we could just say last weapon. So this is the last weapon that was selected. And now in the common action under the link, all we need to do now is compare those two variables together. So is this last weapon, so the last weapon that it had, is it equal or is it not equal? So if it's not equal to the current weapon, so if the last weapon does not equal the current weapon, that means that we have switched weapons. And we're going to hit OK. And I believe this is all we need for right now. Now, if let's see here, in the actions here, we have an execute action out, but we have not equalized that last weapon variable yet. And so what's going to happen is if we leave it just how it is right now, it's going to constantly be looping. It's going to go to here, it's going to execute object action to process weapon, and then it's going to instantly go back, because change weapon, or sorry, what was it? Last weapon never actually re-equalized to current weapon. And we can simply do that in the common action itself. It's the safest place to do it, because you'll never leave without it equalized. So we'll change, and we'll just simply say that this last weapon now equals the current weapon. And you'll see the naming convention I did. This is just one thing I do. I have a different naming convention for self variables than I do the common variables. You'll see I just used like a underscore lowercase separations. And then in the common, I used Pascal case, however that's called, where I used the capitals, but I put them together. And that is just pure preference, but I found it helps me differentiate real quick self variables versus common actions. Okay, so we're equalizing it, but we want to equalize it before we execute out. So we're just going to move that up. And that should be it. That should be the process. So right off the bat, we detect what we want, And then no matter where it's at in any of these states, if we change the weapon, that last weapon variable is not going to be equal to the current weapon anymore. And it's going to go to this process weapon again, where it will equalize and then jump to process weapon and go from there. And you can see that you could have as many weapons as you want, and all you got to do is add this with its value and it will go there. That's how it's a really nice setup. Okay, so we have the process of how to switch, how to detect it, and how to switch it. Now we need to assign the value. So we need to say, hey, we're switching it now. And so we're just going to simply do that through like a HUD object. And I want to make a new animation for this HUD object. So I'm just going to simply say HUD weapon or switcher. We'll just say HUD switcher. And I'm not going to give it an actual resource. I want to show one way that you can actually transfer resources from one animation to the other. It's really nice. I'm going to click center on this one. And then we're going to, for the HUD, I want to be able to see the basic bullet that I have. And then I want to be able to see the boomerang that I have. And then I'll switch between those when I press L1 or R1. So what I'm going to do is grab this normal bullet. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to copy paste it. It's going to ask, or it's going to say basically, hey, if you want this to transfer, we're going to import the image automatically. And that's exactly what we want. So it literally imported that image for me. And now I can get rid of this one because for the HUD, I only want it to show the right facing one. And that should be it for this. Now we can delete this motion actually. So we got the normal bullet. Now I want the boomerang. So like once again, I'm going to come grab the seeking, copy paste it, and yes, import it. So it's a very easy way to transfer your animations resources from one animation to the other. So this one's also going to be single. And let's see here. So this is the boomerang. Okay, and this is just the basic shot. Now I am going to have some animation to this later, but for now, we're just going to do this. Matter of fact, I'm just going to delete this, call it 0, and do no loop for right now. All right, so now we can make our object. Now this object's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be a little different than normal. For instance, I'm not going to use a HUD per se. So I'm going to get rid of all the detections. This is a HUD object, and there's no group that I want to put this in. So I'm actually going to click OK, going to go to group management and create another group. Now this one, I've seen it called many different things. Neutral group, system. I'm just going to simply call it neutral. And we're going to click on that, go back in and change it to neutral. Change that back. Right, so this first action here is going to definitely be if we are basic selected. And then the next one is going to be boomerang selected. Very simple logic here. We're going to add a link, and it's going to be if R1 is on press or if L1 is on press. And the only reason with the or, the only reason that I'm doing the or on this one is because the more weapons you'd have, the more it'd be stacked. But at the very end, you'd always want it to revert back to the beginning if you keep continuing pressing it. At least sometimes you would. So this would be like, these are the only options, so you can kind of press whatever button you want right now, kind of a thing. All right, so we're just going to see, make sure this works before we continue as far as like adjusting like animations and doing some cool effects with it. But the one thing that we do need is we need to add the variable change of the current weapon. So if we're in this state, the basic selected, then our current weapon needs to be 0. if our boomerang is selected, then it needs to be 1. And we're actually in the scene here, we're not going to use a menu scene for this. We're actually going to use the scene and we're going to make it follow the camera wherever it goes. This is actually one way that you can do a layer. So normally you'll have a player layer, and that's the layer that the player's on, that the collisions are set to, and all that good stuff. But we're going to actually move one of these over, and this is going to be the above layer. And we're just going to simply treat this like a HUD. So we're going to put this weapon switcher onto it, and notice that when I clicked on it, it went to the player layer for whatever reason. So I'm just going to make sure that it goes to the above layer, and I'm just going to position it up in the top corner here. So how do we make it follow the camera on a normal scene? We already know that menu scenes follow the camera constantly. Well, we can go to the object here, we can go to basic settings, and we can say fix relative position to camera. Can get rid of all these other ones, and this is going to basically follow the camera. And I don't think that this is a good idea on this type of a thing. I think a menu scene is actually better. I just wanted to show that this is a possibility. So now we can playtest this. And of course, I forget gravity settings. So we'll go to the actions, say no gravity. I don't work in a lot of side view projects, so I'm pretty bad at when it comes to that. And there we go. You can see the HUD and you can see that it stays in place. Let me center this a little bit. And there we go. Now, if I press R1, you can see that it switched to the boomerang. And if I press R1 again, it switches to the normal shot. Can then charge, shoot, and say I'm charging and I press R1, it takes it out of that state and it is now in the boomerang state. So all that's working well. But one thing I'd like to do is spice this HUD change up a little bit. It's it's not very noticeable, and 2, it's just pretty plain. So let's spice that up just using some default features. So the first thing we'll do is in the animations, we will make this do a little, not zoom, it will start it a little bigger and then scale it down to its normal size. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this, give it a frame of, we'll just say 6, and we'll also start it at about 150. So we're starting it scaled by 150. And then we're going to linear interpolate it to the goal, which is 100%. So if I play it, you can see that it just kind of has this little, it zooms in. Now we're going to do the same thing for this, for the boomerang. 6 linear, 150, 150. And so now if we play test that, you can see that it just has that little zoom out effect. So now let's try this. And we can see that it zooms, just has a nice little zoom to it. And then the last thing that I'll add is I'll add a filter to it. So we'll just do a selection filter, and I'll just leave it white, but I'll take the opacity down so you can still kind of see the bullet a little bit. We're going to have this instant. This is a very common pattern I do with some things. Some might like it, some might not. And then I just do a wait for like 0.1. That way it just flashes instantly, and then after 0.1, it deletes. And I make sure to select this one specifically. I usually do just a time of like 0.2. This gives it a nice little filter effect, and then moves it on. And it doesn't matter if this actually deletes or not, because you keep reapplying it. So if I kept pressing R1 really quick, it will still always delete it after 0.1. You're just going to be, and I'll show you here. So now that we have this, we have that nice, goes white and then it fades out. So it looks a lot more flashy, I guess, as far as weapon switching goes. And of course, you could always replace that filter with any kind of thing, a mosaic, noise, monochrome, or all this kind of stuff. That was just an example. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. We made a nice weapon switcher. We did the HUD for it, which actually sets what the current weapon is. We did this particular one on the normal scene using the fixed relative position to camera. So it will always stay with the camera. I don't even know if I showed that off yet. I probably did, but you can see that the HUD icon stays with the camera the whole time, just like it would in this mini scene. The next things on the list, now that we've got this, is we're going to have possibly a slide, ladder climb, as well as a hit. I know a hit's a very important one. It's usually in a lot of games where you get hit, you get sent out to a hit animation and go from there. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you at the next video.